Sure.
Welcome everyone to the last event of Hack the Job. Boris is going to walk us through how he goes about solving a lead code problem. Most of you may know him, and he's a legend. He's a legend. Yeah, do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, some may say Boris is poggers. I've heard that a number of times. He's an extremely skilled, successful, cool, and intelligent when it comes to careers in lead code, and especially for first years that might be watching this. Like this is like late stage, end stage, stuff that you might be interested in looking into.
Yeah, and we'll give the floor to you.
Perfect. Yeah, appreciate the warm welcome. I'm not a genius. I just it's just all about hard work, honestly, and just kind of knowing that using your resources and stuff. And there's a bit of luck involved too. But yeah, I guess welcome everyone to Hack the TC 2022. My name is Boris, and I'll be doing the little presentation today. Next slide. Cool. So I guess before we start, for all the first years and the copers, we got to understand what TC is. Like, what is Hack the TC? What is TC, right? So TC stands for total compensation. And basically what that means is the dollar amount that is the sum of like your annual base salary, like as a new grad, right? So for interns, it's a little different because I think you get like monthly TC, but generally for new grads and, as you sort of progress in your career, TC is basically your base salary, which is like, your check, right, that you get, as well as a signing bonus. So when you join a company, they give you some sort of signing bonus. They also give you vesting stock options. So, you sort of, I guess you kind of just earn stock as you stay with the company, and you can liquidate it for cash, or you can keep it and stuff. And there's also other compensation that is sometimes included, like relocation stipends. They're usually kind of, added to the signing bonus. And TC is usually counted in USD. It's also something you flex on your team blind posts, which is, if you don't know what team blind is yet, it's okay. If you don't know what it is yet, I don't suggest going there, but it's basically a place where you can talk about companies anonymously. And they have this culture where if you don't tell them your TC, they get really mad at you. Because it's always about a measuring contest, if you will, between people at different companies. And you might see something like this here, where it was like 124, 60, 154 over 4. This is like what the TC breakdown, and it basically just means it's 124K base salary, 60K sign on, and 150 over 4. If it vests quarterly, it's like you get your 37.5K per year, like in a linear fashion type of thing. So that you may or may not see this on like websites like Blind and stuff. Cool. So how do we hack the TC, right? Like this is the basic kind of, the basic strategy, right? I kind of came up with this on the fly. SLAM. It doesn't really, like, the acronym doesn't make any sense. I just saw it. It was kind of funny. But basically the steps are, you need a strong resume, right? Obviously everybody knows this, like, I'm not discovering fire here. Like, you need a strong resume that gets your foot through the door. Then you need to lead code. And I wrote lead code 3 times because if you do well in lead code, you'll have no problem doing well on all of these technical assessments. And then the rest we're going to talk about, which is behavioral interviews and stuff. And that's not that hard. For first years, this is especially important, having like a few interesting and preferably technically complex-ish projects. So it's something that you can discuss with an interviewer, right? Basically like, hey, like, I worked on like some like really complex algorithm, or I made like a Netflix clone, or like, I made some like audio processing software. It's something that showed that like, yeah, I'm not just somebody that just learned, like, memorized Dijkstra's algorithm, but rather I'm somebody who's like invested time into like learning new technology, and I'm able to explain it even a few months later. So that's kind of the purpose of having a complex project, is that if it's just like a front-end client, or just like some like website, there's not much you can really talk about. It's just, you need something that's worth, like, at face value, that you can talk in depth about. Ability to communicate well during interview. This is also very, very important. ability, like when you code, you have to be able to speak at the same time and talk about your thought process and how you approach, certain, like the problem. And so the interviewer has an insight into your head and how your brain solves problems. Dan just wrote more lead code, just in case you forgot that you do need lead code. Like all this stuff is also important, but lead code is like the most important. And lastly, since we're hacking the TC, we always got to negotiate, especially for new grad. A lot of companies will lowball you. You can go from like 170K to a guy got 200, like 65K TC, right? For new grad, just crazy. That's like, yeah, so negotiating is really important. And I want to talk about like all these sort of things a little bit more in depth, but this is basically the overview of like what should be in your head if you have decided to commit to, applying for these like, Cali or bust type jobs. So first, the resume. I'm not going to talk a lot about this. I know we've had, we already had a presentation on it that probably did a 10 times better job than I can. So I'm just going to talk about just the kind of the obvious basic things. First, if no one is replying, like if you apply to 100 companies and you didn't get a response, your resume is probably bad. Like it is what it is. I know it's very obvious, but I've seen people that just keep applying every year with the same resume and they get nothing and they start coping. If no one's replying, your resume is probably bad. Kind of rule of thumb, this is what I did, and I still do. I'll probably keep doing it for the rest of my life, is just copy people who've made it to places. Like you see somebody like Waterloo or UFT or whatever that worked at like the Citadels, at the Googles, like a lot of them have their resumes posted on their websites. Like just look at what they did. Like copy their format, copy like how they write their sentences, like the wording, the structure of the resume, even like the template that they use, right? Like what kind of words do they use to describe what they did? Like how do they describe like the technical aspects of their job? That stuff is very important. There's also like all the Discord servers. There's obviously BComp, but there's also servers like CS Careers Discord, like the Reddit, the subreddits. There's a competitive programming Discords and Slack channels, and these types of places always have people that are like, they're always kind of open to talk to you and tell you like what you may be doing wrong from their perspective, and kind of what they did to maybe get their internship or get their new grad offer, as well as YouTube videos. I know my friend Sean told me about like the Coding Jesus or something. He has like some like resume review type videos. Like I looked at them, they look pretty sick. So these are kind of all the resources you should have in mind. And then also kind of like a disclaimer, there's a lot of shady resource online and advice. So like literally take everything with a grain of salt. You can even take what I said with a grain of salt, like it's like resumes are super subjective. You can show your resume to like 10 different people and like half of them will tell you it's amazing and half of them will tell you is garbage. So again, take everything with a grain of salt, but always try to reinvent your resume, especially if it's not working. Okay, so lead code. What is lead code? I know I've said it like 5 times by now. Lead code is literally interview problems. It's just basically a database of problems that allows you to write code and check if it works, like if it solves the problem. It's a website, you can register for it, it's free. There's something called Blind 75. It's basically a list of 75 problems that they cover like all the base kind of, I guess, algorithms and data structures that you might want to know. So things like graphs, trees, linked lists, array manipulation, strings, all the stuff that I listed in that bullet point. These are all things you're expected to know for technical interviews, for intern and for new grad. And Blind 75 does a good job of giving like a primer on like all of these topics. And these are usually the types of questions that you'll see. Also, it's personal preference, but I would say Python 3 or bust for interview questions. It's probably the best language, as it's, everybody understands it. It's fast to write, and in my opinion, is just, a good language that you can use. Yeah. So I guess the technical interview, this is where like the lead code stuff comes in. Just I guess a quick primer on this stuff is you want to ask clarifying questions. For example, usually some companies might give you something like, oh, like you're given an array, do this, right? So you want to ask like, oh, is this like list sorted? Are there negative numbers? Are these always going to be integers, or like, is it possible that we're going to have like floating points, right? So all these questions you want to ask, like not only does this make the question more clear for you, but it also gives more data points about you to the interviewer, right? So the interviewer says, oh, like this person like is actually, he understands that this, or they understand that this problem, is, there might be more to this problem and they're thinking about it, versus rather just like writing some solution. And then it turns out that you have negative numbers and your thing doesn't work. And you don't want that to happen. Yeah, always explain what you're about to do. I fell into this trap before where I would just be like, oh yeah, like this looks like this, and I would just like write it, and then it'd be like, oh well, like this actually, like this algorithm doesn't even work. So you don't want to be in that position. So you always explain, and sometimes the interviewer will even like, they might even be able to tell you. They're like, oh yeah, like that makes sense, or like, yeah, like that, that might not work, right? And then they're gonna ask you to like figure out why it wouldn't work, and that's even more data points for them, right? So your problem solving ability. And the interviewer should always understand what you're about to code. That's like the whole verbal part of the interviews. You should always be talking, right? So the interviewer should have a good idea of what you're doing. Yeah, come up with good examples. It's pretty obvious, but nonetheless important. Understanding big O notation, also really important. You should be able to explain like the runtime and the memory sort of scaling of your code. This is like interviewing 101. You should be able to know if something is like O of n squared or like n log n, and why it's n squared. Like if it's like two nested loops and stuff, and you should be able to like at least explain like the basic ideas of this. Again, optimize your code if you can. If you have an n squared solution, try to think about an n log n solution, O of n. If you can optimize, you're obviously going to score higher points. It's not as easy as it sounds, but with practice, trust me, it becomes easier. Because you're going to start noticing certain trends and patterns and stuff. And the last point is very important. Like, do not stop talking unless you're told to. Like the last thing you want to do is be silent and just like coding like random crap. Like you're just sitting there like mute. Like you always want to keep talking. You want to talk about like what you're doing. You want to talk about like what you're thinking about. Like maybe like you're thinking about some edge case. And that just really makes the interviewer's job easier, and they usually appreciate that a lot, versus them always asking like, oh, like what are you doing, I don't understand. Yeah, so that's kind of like the technical interview. Applies to phone screens, applies to on-sites, for coding questions.